CJ Stroud was one of the 4 players selected by his fellow Texans to be a team captain this season. We're going to talk about that along with Tank Dell changing his number from 13 to 3 and how that affects the 713 connection. We're also going to talk about my record prediction for this season. And then we'll get into these Mike Evans rumors that have been floating around on Texans Twitter. And then we'll close out with a preview of the Ravens matchup this week, week 1, the first week of NFL regular season football, the 2023 NFL season. I am James Roy, and this is Texans Takes with James Roy. Let's get started. Before we get started, if you like the content you're seeing or hearing or whatever it is you're doing with it right now, if you could like, comment, subscribe, or whatever it is you do on the platform you are receiving this content on, I would really appreciate that. It helps me out a lot. Thank you. The Texans named 4 team captains. Laramie Tunsil and CJ Stroud were the offensive team captains, and Jalen Petrie and Jimmy Ward were named the defensive team captains. So both starting safeties and then the quarterback and his blindside protector are now the team captains for the Texans this season. And there is still a lot of people that will tell you that CJ Stroud was handed this award that was voted on by his teammates, and that, I don't know how you hand it to him unless D'Amico rigged the ballot, or maybe Nick, who knows. But at this point, it's getting kind of tired to hear that people think that CJ hasn't earned where he's at. I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times, and I'll keep saying it till I don't believe it anymore or until it's not true. CJ Stroud has made every step he's needed to earn being the starting quarterback week 1. To this point, I have no reason to believe that CJ Stroud didn't earn where he's at. And I think that him being voted team captain confirms it. It's not just this thing where people kind of use these things where they're like watching teams and they're like, yeah, you can tell by the way you look at the team. Like, you're not in the locker room. You don't know how the team views the player. You just kind of speak out of this feeling of what you're observing. And we get so little of it throughout the offseason. But our big confirmation that CJ Stroud earned QB1 and has earned the respect of the locker room comes in the form of him as a rookie being voted a team captain. As far as the other team captains go, Laramie Tunsil, sure, that's expected. He's really the only other player on the offense. Maybe Dameon Pierce could have been another option, but realistically, Laramie Tunsil was where I was at. And then looking at defense, Jimmy Ward coming in as a free agent and already earning that position is not surprising, but it is impressive. And Jalen Petrie continuing. Once again, I feel like the results of this vote just confirmed to me that what was happening last year was not a fluke, and that Jalen Petrie was going out there putting in work. He showed results, and the team took note. And now it's a new offseason, a lot of roster turnover, and there's everyone who's on the roster now still believes that Jalen Petrie is who we know him to be to this point. And so him being voted in as a team captain confirms that to me. There are some that would say that they would have liked to have seen Will Anderson Jr. be a team captain. I would say that the position of impact that he's in as a defensive end is not the same as CJ Stroud. So I think he'll eventually be a team captain, but I think that he on defense, when you're not in like a middle linebacker kind of position where you're like the guy in charge on defense, it's just a little harder to get that, I don't know, to earn that. So like it doesn't really not make sense to me that he didn't get team captain, whereas CJ Stroud, as the leader of the offense, like either he was going to earn QB1 and have a good shot at team captain, or he was just not going to be team captain, and people would be concerned. So I think it panned out the way that it should. I mean, I don't have any problems with the team captains that were chosen, and even if I did, I'm not in the locker room, and I trust the players. So even if I did have a lot of qualms with what was eventually decided on, I'd probably keep my peace on that. One of the biggest things that Texans social media, Texans, anyone who followed the team this offseason gravitated towards was the 713 connection between CJ Stroud and Tank Dell. The storyline really wrote itself from draft night, where Tank says, he talked to CJ, told him, hey, pick me. And then, you get the impression that CJ told Nick, hey, maybe you should get Tank Dell. And then, you see them build that connection through the offseason, you see them develop chemistry. And then you go, wait, look at them standing next to each other as 7 and 1-3. 713. Wow, that's Houston's area code. Awesome. The 713 connection. And that was going to be great, but it can't be anymore because Tank Dell is now number 3. I've seen a lot of people going around saying, if you played football, you'd understand why it's a better number. I'm not going to critique why Tank Dell chose the number he did or whatever. It was brought to my attention that the new 713 connection, which I had already kind of talked about, obviously searching for something, you look and you go, oh yeah, it's Stroud, Ward, and Dell, Tank Dell. They're still together. There's just another name in there now. But when you do look at it, it does more encompass the team as a whole. It captures the offense with CJ Stroud being the leader there. You got Jimmy Ward as a leader on defense, and then you've got Tank Dell, who's going to be very vital to special teams. If you think about it, we're capturing offense, defense, and special teams in this new 713 connection. If you want to gravitate towards that, I mean, I think it's cool. I obviously had high hopes for the Tank Dell CJ Stroud connection. I don't think Tank Dell changing his number is going to affect those high hopes, but yeah, obviously it's like if Will Anderson decided not to be 51, you don't have Area 51. You'd still have Terminator, I guess, but the change in numbers is disappointing in that way. But I'm not going to judge Tank Dell for wanting to be a different number. Honestly, if number one opened up, I wouldn't have been surprised to see him move to it. But with Jimmy Ward there, that was unlikely. It is about time to finalize my record prediction for the season. I have had the Texans as low as 5 to 6 wins and as high as maybe 9 wins if I'm being overly optimistic. And so when I look at what's happening right now with the injuries on the offensive front, I want to be optimistic about it. And I saw DJ Bienenemy had said there's really not as much reason to be worried about it as you think there is. And so I have hopes there that are hanging in the balance. I need to see something. The offensive line group that's going to go out onto the field for week one is a group that we didn't really get a whole lot of looks at together. So it's going to be a matter of, is CJ Stroud going to have to, as a lot of people that were really high on Mills will tell you, are you just going to tell him to step up in the pocket, step up in the pocket, or is the pocket going to exist? And so with that in mind, understanding that could be a struggle the first 4 weeks of the season, I want to say it impacts my view of the season, but I tell people all the time, I'm a little bit too optimistic about the Texans. And so with that in mind, my record prediction for this season is going to be 8-9. And so looking over the schedule, there's just too many teams that I think the Texans can win against. When we look at the team last year and how much they've improved this year, it was a team that was in a ton of one-score games. And I think the improvement in talent puts them in a position to tip the scales and take a couple of those games that they didn't take last year. And so a team that did not win many, if any, games last year, I think will make a massive improvement this year. And so I'm going to go with 8-9. You heard it here first, or maybe you heard it elsewhere, but you also heard it here. The Texans will go 8-9 and finish, I don't know, second or third in the AFC South. It really depends on if the Culture Titans really want to play at all, because the Jaguars will probably be first. But who knows? Who knows? Maybe they won't be. Recently, it's been going around on Texans Twitter that the Texans should pursue Mike Evans. Mike Evans has recently it's been made public that he is in contract negotiations with the Buccaneers that are not going necessarily super well. And I guess recent reports would say that the sides could reach an agreement, but on the off chance that they didn't, the Texans should pursue him, is what a lot of people are saying. And don't get me wrong, I would love to have Mike Evans on this team. Mike Evans would be perfect for CJ Stroud because it would make a receiving core that has potential suddenly have, actual talent that has been proven that to consistently produce in it. The problem lies in cap numbers, which is that there's 1 year left in Mike Evans's deal. I don't know how a lot of that works, but I have to imagine that the Texans have to make a lot of moves to create the cap space to take on his contract, or in the process of the trade have a deal worked out, which I don't know if that is possible with the way Nick Caserio is. So that is to me more the roadblock in that trade relative to, say asking price. I think the Texans could afford to pay the price that the Buccaneers want for Mike Evans, but that's not really what it's about in my eyes. And so with that, I recently mentioned on Twitter that if the Texans were to pursue Mike Evans and make this really difficult, almost impossible trade happen, it would be proof that the Texans are probably listening to the fans a little too much. And there was a lot of people that I think misconstrued that comment. And that's to say that just based on what I've observed, it would have to be there's no one with sources is saying the Texans are looking into or the Texans are interested. And I know they've been a tight-lipped ship recently, but things like that have leaked in other organizations and have leaked for the Texans in the past. And I just have trouble believing that if Mike Evans in those contract negotiations wanted some leverage, that he wouldn't let it out that the Texans had been entertaining making an offer for him, because he'd probably be in the know and it would be beneficial to him for people to know that. So with that, with no inkling from the organization that they are even close to pursuing that, it would indicate that it's something that is not possible, because I don't think Caserio has Twitter. But, obviously some people think that the Texans front office just sits on Twitter, they're scrolling on their phone, and they're going and they go, "Oh my gosh, dude, CJ Stroud Lover 79 just said that we should trade for Mike Evans because it would help his development." And in all my years of knowing football, I have never once thought to myself that that would be a good idea. In fact, over these 3 seasons that I've been the GM of the Texans, not once has it crossed my mind that it would be a good idea for a young quarterback to have a really good receiver. In fact, that's why I haven't made that move. And so now that I've read this on Twitter, I will now be putting in the work to make that move. And you see how ridiculous that sounds. It doesn't sound like something that would legitimately happen. And so I guess that's what I was really getting at, is that it would be ridiculous if the Texans made that move. And it would almost make me believe that the Texans are scrolling Twitter, because I just haven't I haven't seen anyone with real sources say that this is a real thing. It's 100% fan driven that this narrative is happening, which is what happens when any great player becomes available, or you see the potential for them to become available. Texans fans have been talking about trading for T. Higgins since like early in the offseason, when there was the news that he might be moved. Everyone was like, send a first round pick to Cincinnati and get T. Higgins, which I don't disagree with. But at the end of the day, it's all fan driven. And so until there is any solid evidence that the Texans are actually interested, that is all it is. The Texans are traveling to Baltimore this week to take on Lamar Jackson and the Ravens. And I am a little torn on what the bigger concern is with this matchup. I understand why the default when you see this on paper is to go, "Oh, the Texans really got a bad draw. They're starting the season off against the Ravens. This is going to be a tough one." And historically, the Ravens defense is good. And, since Lamar Jackson's been quarterback, I've watched the Texans in previous years struggle with guys like Cam Newton, guys that are mobile, even when they had good defenses. So, to see them with this fresh head coach, new defense, kind of implementing things, getting things up to speed, they have the talent, but can they contain Lamar Jackson? That's one concern. So it's been said recently that the offense is going to be geared more towards Lamar actually passing, because he has more targets now, and and he desires to prove that he's a real quarterback. Because if we don't already know that, I mean, from what I've seen, he can hurl the rock. There's a reason that he's playing quarterback, and anyone who's saying that he's a running back is trying to get a rise out of you. So Lamar Jackson is a legit quarterback. The problem is that one of his most lethal skill sets as a quarterback is his elusiveness and his ability to find space and scramble. So I would foresee that a Texans defense that has not done well defending the run, playing in pass coverage, would probably struggle to contain a guy like Lamar Jackson. So that's my early concern from the Ravens end of things, is that. Additionally, their defense, I guess, could concern me. I'm just not familiar enough to know if their defense is actually still as good as my old football brain would tell me they are. Like, if I'm looking back at, like, historically, I'm like, yeah, the Ravens always field a good defense. John Harbaugh's got that thing tuned in. But do they? I don't know. I don't actually know if the Ravens defense is going to be good this year. So that's not as concerning to me as Lamar Jackson is with the Ravens. But turning to my other concern, as I aired out earlier, we haven't seen a starting offensive line that features Jarrett Patterson and Josh Jones next to, Titus Howard, who we presume is going to be back with a club on his hand, and Laramie Tunsil and Shaq Mason. So if it gels, then he's going to have a great offensive line, and he'll probably do just as good as he did in the preseason, and through the course of a whole game could put up a relatively impressive stat line and lead a couple of scoring drives and keep this team in the game. But if that interior O-line's not good, we could see panicked CJ that looks unsettled and doesn't make good throws. And that would be detrimental to the team doing anything on offense. We'd probably see a lot of Dameon Pierce. And we probably will either way. Dameon Pierce is probably going to be featured pretty prominently early on to make sure that Stroud has time to settle in. So, my deepest concern, Ravens wise, Lamar Jackson. My deepest concern, Texans wise, offensive line. If the offensive line came to play and they show up, then I think the Texans could very well shock the Ravens in this game. I think that it'll look a lot like Colorado TCU, where CJ Stroud's gonna have to play like Shadur Sanders did. He's gonna have to put up his first ever 300-yard game in his debut as a Texan at the NFL level, and he's gonna have to lead a couple, 3 or 4 scoring drives to keep up with what Lamar Jackson's doing, unless D'Amico tunes in the defense and locks down Lamar, in which case that wouldn't be expected. But I would suspect that Lamar Jackson will probably give the defense a little bit of trouble. So at the end of the day, if the offensive line pulls through and CJ Stroud can pull some sort of superstar performance out of that, then I think the Texans could shock the Ravens. So if you want my score prediction, I'd say the Ravens will probably put up 28-31 points. And so the Texans have to beat that. And I think so if the offensive line tanks and doesn't do well, it could very well be 31-10, 31-17, right? But if the offensive line for the Texans holds, it could be closer to 31-28, or the Texans could take it like 34-31. So I know it's all situational. I'm going to say that I believe this is a 3-point game in favor of the Ravens. So I'll go with 31-28 and just be optimistic that the offensive line works, but the Texans fall short. And I'll hope that the Texans don't fall short and that they win this game, because that would be amazing. Well, thanks for tuning in to Texans Takes with James Roy. I have been James Roy. If you liked what you've seen, heard, or however it is you're receiving this, if you could like, comment, subscribe, anything that you do on this video would be really helpful to me, and it would really mean a lot to me. And additionally, before I let you go, I'd like to remind you that I have signed on to be a media caster with PSF, and I will be covering the Texans. We've put the show together, and we're about to get on the road and really crank out a nice chat room with live streaming features. That's just going to be an incredible asset during this NFL season. So I'd love it if you follow the link in the description of this video to my link in bio and download the PSF app and join the Texans chat room today. Well, I hope next time I see you, I'm talking about a Texans W over the Ravens, but I guess I'll tell you all about it when I see you again. H-Town forever.